What is the Good Company Way? We're a new community dedicated to exploring ESG, CSR, net zero and sustainability topics, whilst fostering meaningful conversations and connections. That sounds good, doesn't it? We want to create a dynamic space where experts and enthusiasts come together to learn, inspire and drive positive change, balancing profitability with social and environmental responsibility. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mike Midley, and it's my great pleasure to be the host for today's event. Just before we get started, please feel free to use the chat function to say hello and tell us where you're joining us from today. And also please use it as we go through the session with any questions that you may have. And finally, just a quick reminder that we want to create a very open environment for everyone, so we expect all attendees to be respectful to each other. And further details of our code of contact can be found on our meetup page. So today we're joined by Adam Garfunkel, owner and managing director of Junction. And Junction are an international consultancy with offices in Vancouver, Toronto and London. And they help leaders take bold action to confront the climate emergency, champion social justice, and build meaningful, purpose-driven companies. Adam, very warm welcome to the Good Company Way, and thanks so much for agreeing to be our very first guest speaker.
Thank you.
Before we delve into some of the essential reflections you think organisational leaders should be focused on at this time, perhaps you could give us just a quick potted history of who you are and how you've got to here today.
Great, yes, happy to. And I've got just a couple of slides I can speak to that. So why don't I share my screen and get going? I'll try and talk for about 25 minutes and then allow lots of time for sort of Q&A discussion and so on. Let me
Perfect.
just
Great.
get the screen sharing going, and I'll start with a little bit of a intro. Is that everyone can see that holding opening slide? Just checking. Yeah, all good.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Delighted to be here with you today and sharing 6 reflections I've put together that are designed to encourage leaders to consider what authentic leadership in these powerful times looks like. They're in 3 couplets. They all begin with A, and know that old chestnut authenticity is not one of the 6 A's. But before I do that, as per Mike's invitation, I'm just going to run through a little bit about Junction and me, and then get cracking. So we say at Junction that we sit at the intersection of purpose, strategy, culture, and impact. There are about 15 of us. Mike said we're mostly in Vancouver, Toronto, and London. There's a couple of people in Germany and Austria and satellite towns around Vancouver. And for over 20 years, we've been helping organizations first define their purpose, plan their impact, share their stories, and embrace accountability. So what does that mean? Our services tend to fall into 3 buckets. Strategy and planning includes our proprietary turning point, strategic planning process for whole organizations. We also have a sustainability or ESG strategy service. Impact measurement and reporting includes our theory of change, work and impact evaluation, along with supporting companies to become certified B corporations, and of course, lots of sustainability reporting, which I've been doing for over 25 years. And under brand, culture, and communications, we help kind of really crystallize what that purpose of an organization is, help companies uncover their values and identify the behaviors and messaging needed to really embed purposeful and impactful thinking into company cultures. Here are some of the companies we've worked with. We helped The Guardian become a B Corp, as we did with The Body Shop, in fact. Intersport, the world's largest sporting goods retailer, we helped with a holistic sustainability strategy across their more than 50 country offices, and plenty more. And just to summarize me, I've been doing this for a very long time, various guises, first as a campaigner and fundraiser for Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth here in the UK, then a kind of communications focus to my work, and more recently, last 20 years or so, consulting to companies, all in the service of helping businesses to plan and deliver effective strategies and communications, Not only do I co-own Junction Strategy, I also co-own a field with two friends, which we are restoring to a sustainably managed woodland here in the west of England. Those that know me know that I love good food, my beloved Arsenal Football Club, and going on lots of cold water swims. When I was a campaign, I improved access to the information provisions in the UK Environment Act in 1995, a whole bunch of work on contaminated land, bunch of work with Adidas on their first disclosures around sustainability from 2000 to 2015. And the 2019 launched UN Principles for Responsible Banking. I conceived the communication strategy that saw not 30 founding banks, but 130 banks be launched signatories to that initiative. And I continue to work with them. I came up with a concept for the Sustainable Beauty Coalition, where I now sit as an advisor, along with being on the UK Regional Standards Advisory Group as well. So that's enough about Junction and me. Why are we here today? I'm sure that some of you will have seen this image before. I like to say we are literally playing a round while the planet burns. This is a 6-year-old picture now, and of course it's only got worse since then. This is in the Pacific Northwest. You'll see a couple of people in the corner of the image on the left-hand corner actually looking at the forest fire, while everyone else just seems to be ignoring it, which I think is a lovely metaphor for how we're not really addressing collectively the climate crisis. And of course, in some ways, we've seen amazing human progress over the past couple of centuries, increased standards of living, world poverty has fallen significantly, over the last couple of 100 years. But of course, you can see from the correlations of human progress indicators on the left half of this screen that they've come at the cost of environmental indicators on the right hand half of this screen. So increased tropical forest loss, for example, of course, increased surface temperatures that we all know about, with forest fires raging in Canada and elsewhere this summer, of course, southern Europe particularly. Ocean acidification, you take any one of those and there's this correlation. And of course, especially since the 50s, that kind of clear correlation between our economic development and all of these increasing environmental indicators have got worse. And we essentially, the progress has come at an unsustainable cost to the environment. And this is actually now an out-of-date image, but it's a Kate Raworth's Donut Economics image that shows that not only are we lifting, are we exceeding those planetary boundaries, and I think settled science is now that we're probably exceeding those planetary boundaries of 6 of those areas, not just 4 as shows here, but also we're simultaneously falling short of meeting basic social needs. And that is a recipe for disaster. Where we need to be is in the ring of the donut. That's the safe space and a just space for humanity, and we are some way from it. This is a great cartoon. Essentially, the trouble we have is that business is operating principally with one key stakeholder in mind, that is the owners or shareholders, and that is driving us to a very, very dangerous place, sometimes now called the Anthropocene, because it's humans who are making such a significant change to climate and biodiversity and nature, which is kind of particularly disappointing, really, when we know a lot of the solutions. Project Drawdown has gathered them together. These are all currently available, growing in scale, financially viable solutions to our climate crisis, but they're not really being put into practice at any great scale, or at least with the speed that is necessary. So, biomass, biochar, all sorts of opportunities to implement solutions to our climate crisis. And frankly, people have had enough. I mean, people want something different. There's Extinction Rebellion, the movement for the Green New Deal in North America, and of course, Greta Thunberg has inspired hundreds and thousands of children to go on climate strikes. And of course, none of this existed 5 years ago. right? Like there's been a definite sort of shift up, because I think increasingly people recognize that what we need is system change. And, this is not about playing around the edges, small improvements with your corporate sustainability performance. This is about changing the current system. That's what we need to do. And in order to change the current system, social scientists will tell you that there are two necessary conditions you have to have in place. First one, you have to recognize that the system is failing. And secondly, you have to see the existence of viable alternatives. You need to see proof points that there is another way, which is why I cite Project Drawdown, why I'm a big advocate for the B Corp community, because I think those are examples or exemplars, if you like, of how we can run businesses differently and how we can implement the solutions that are known, but we just need to do it at scale and pace that is necessary. And alongside that system change, we also need a mindset change. We need to start seeing, this is from Future Fit Business Benchmark, something I'm sure some of you will know. We need to move from seeing businesses separate from people and planet. We need to move from seeing people and humanity as separate from the planet, and understand that actually it's all interconnected. So here we see, the traditional business is run for shareholder value, where financial returns are maximized to the expense of any other stakeholders' concerns or interests. Shared value is a little bit better, but essentially it's often characterized by doing a little bit less harm, certainly not aligning with planetary boundaries and social ethical norms, often also characterized by sort of giving back, doing some good, maybe philanthropy somewhere, but not really addressing core impacts and certainly not aligning them with what people and planet need. But what we do need to move to is this idea of system value, where we see businesses helping to profitably solve the problems of people and planet through business, not to contribute to those problems through their business. To summarize Colin Mayer's work at the British Academy on Purposeful Business. So that's my context. So now my 6As, these are my reflections drawn from my work experience in various ways over the years. And here they are. I'm going to approach them in 3 couplets. So first of all, approach and ambition. Now, when Jim Collins was researching his book about great companies, he and his team looked at 1,435 companies that appeared on the Fortune 500. That was the total in his initial candidate list for the book that came from Good to Great. And only 11 made the very tough cut in his study. And in all of those, he found what he called level 5 leadership in key positions, including the CEO, at this pivotal time of transition of making great strides within the business. And essentially what he learned was that the X factor of successful leadership is humility. It's leadership where people are not thinking, those leaders not thinking about what accrues to them. They're not thinking about being the center of everything. They're not thinking about what they can get out of it, but their drive and ambition is channeled outwards. They lead in a spirit of service, and they set inspiring standards for what that service can look like, rather than necessarily being an inspiring personality. So what he found in his research was that extraordinary leaders display this kind of powerful mixture of personal humility and indomitable will. They're incredibly ambitious, but their ambition is first and foremost for the cause, for the organization, for its purpose, not for themselves. Now, every good to great transition in Jim Collins' research began with a leader who motivated the enterprise more through this inspired standards than his or her inspiring personality. So his analysis is, to be a great leader, you lead for the cause, you lead for the work, not for yourself. And then if I move on to ambition, I think things have changed. I think things changed about 5 years ago when the SR15 report was issued. This is the special report into 1.5 degrees of global heating. So you might recall the Paris Accord was signed in 2015. It talked about staying under 2 degrees, the sort of aspirational target of 1.5 degrees of global heating. This report came out 3 years after that and showed what the difference would be if we managed collectively to stay at 1.5 degrees versus 2, which was significant. And in that report, the scientists, I think, almost for the first time, really kind of pulled back the veil and didn't hold back on the language that they used. They talked about deep emissions reductions, which you might expect, but they also talked about rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. Rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. That's what's needed to deliver 1.5 degrees of global heating only, and cap it at that. Now, that's pretty bold language for a collection of scientists where inevitably the outlying research will kind of be removed from the analysis just by the process of kind of aggregation. But it was enormously significant. 1 month later, 17,000 students in 24 countries joined Greta Thunberg in the Friday school strikes. And another 5 months later, Extinction Rebellion put that pink boat in Oxford Circus here in central London and deliberately practiced participatory decision-making in Hyde Park on what to do next. And another 5 months after that was when the project I worked on that I mentioned earlier, in September 2019, at the UN General Assembly in New York, the UN Principles for Responsible Banking was launched, where the first principle commits signatories to aligning our business strategy to be consistent with and contribute to individuals' needs and society's goals, as expressed in the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Aligning our business strategy is not about banks having a few green products. This is about their whole strategy, their whole portfolio, every decision they make, aligning with, being consistent with what's needed for people and planet, consistent with those ethical or societal norms and in line with the science. So I think that's a shift. That shift that we saw then has changed the way that collectively we see how things work. It's no longer good enough to kind of integrate considerations about climate and nature into your risk analysis as a business. You have to align with those norms of behavior that society expects from businesses. That's the shift that we've seen across the last 5 years. This is the work that needs doing. This is what Jim Collins talks about, ambition for the cause, and the importance of leaders knowing where they're headed. You need to be able to articulate a compelling vision of the world made better by your work. As Steve Jobs famously said, you need to aim to put a dent in the universe. And that's what we need. That level of ambition is what we need now from all organizations and all leaders of organizations. An aspirational, actionable, clear, and concise vision statement to set people in your organization clarity on where you're heading and how that's going to deliver what people and planet needs. So some questions perhaps to reflect on. What is my personal purpose? What can I facilitate as a leader? How can I support my teammates to be their best possible selves at work? And under the ambition idea, and we can come back to these in the Q&A, do we have a clear vision that is aspirational, actionable, clear and concise? How will we, at our place of work, put a dent in the universe? Now, the next pair of couplets are activism and alliances. This guy, the white kind of lab coat on in the foreground of this picture is me 29 years ago. I was doorstepping the then Environment Minister Robert Atkins in his Lancashire constituency one Saturday morning in December 1994. So this is one that's kind of come by fairly naturally. As Inga Anderson, the head of UNEP, has said, we had our chance to make incremental changes, but that time is over. So this is how a recent article co-authored by Shah Love from Natura and Beth Thorin of Patagonia and Sophie Dembinski of Ecosia begins. Inaction is not an option. Businesses committed to being on the right side of history must advocate for policies, regulations, and laws to achieve economy-wide systemic change at the pace and scale required to achieve climate targets. This means working on their own transformational approaches, as well as joining forces with others to create the critical mass needed for wide-scale change. Now, I think you can choose your flavor of activism. You can protest. So, for example, the big one protest that Business Declares organised here in London in April this year was designed to be accessible to businesses, business leaders who've never attended a protest before. And I met several. And I think that was perhaps its big success. People, it was a sort of very friendly, kind of low risk protest to attend. But that may not be for you. You perhaps can mobilize your people behind issues that matter. Select industry or trade bodies that you join or choose not to join or leave. You can lobby for the change that you see is needed. You have to do something now. Now, and I mean, listen, when I was an activist campaigner, I never once thought that government could be left to take care of things. I expected they needed pressuring by organizations like Friends of the Earth, where I work, to do the right thing. And I'm proud to say, as I mentioned earlier, that we got some improved access to information provisions in that Environment Act 1995 around access to information about polluted sites. But what I didn't expect back then is that businesses could be activists as well. And I think that is, interestingly, where things are heading. The Ableman Trust Barometer, this year's version of it, going for 20 odd years now, that business they identify is the most trusted institution. And they say it's obligated to join forces with the government to address challenges and map a clear vision for the future, which is perhaps surprising. Governments around the world, I think it's clear to see, are falling short of protecting the most vulnerable. And there's a role for businesses in kind of correcting that current trajectory, placing people, justice and human rights at the center of their work. Because civil society, youth movements, Greta Thunberg's Friday School Strike can't and shouldn't need to do it on their own. So partnerships, alliances, they work. They're much more effective than doing things on your own. Coalitions that have come together, for example, here in the UK, to promote legislative change in the guise of the Better Business Act, for example, call for higher standards across businesses, and they've got lots of widespread support from august bodies like the Institute of Directors, right through to the certified B corporations, who you might expect to be behind that sort of agenda. A very wide group of 2,000 industry groups and others that are part of that coalition. That kind of call for change, that kind of partnership with civil society interests, leveraging the distinct assets and capacity of each, I think, is what we now need to see from businesses. So what does that look like? Clearly, you've got to go into partnerships with your eyes open. You've got to know what your red lines are, where you won't go. You've got to know what you really want to do, your green lines, you might call them. You've got to be able to define what mutual success looks like for both parties. Obviously document that so everyone's super clear in some kind of charter, and then refresh it, revisit it. We've done a bunch of work helping some of those kind of partnerships come to life. They're vital for the change that we need to see in the world. So, questions for you. What do we stand for? Where can we best use our voice? What engagement style is consistent with our brand and our values? And who do we share interests with? What can we contribute that will best leverage the unique assets of each partner to advance our shared cause? And then the final couplet I just want to speak to before we get into a conversation is accountability and awareness. So true accountability means listening and responding. It means doing things differently. It doesn't just mean engaging. And I think there's real value here in talking about good intentions and real impacts. So, it's tricky. Let's not be too critical on ourselves. Let's assume positive intent, but let's see companies genuinely adjust strategy or tactics in the light of what they hear from stakeholders feeding back to them. It means also, of course, including voices that you might have previously ignored. So, for example, cosmetics brand here, Faith in Nature, has put nature on the board in the voice of an environmental lawyer to make sure that the board running that business hears what nature has to say, if you like. So leaders have to be willing to do things differently, to act, to kind of sense how it's going, to respond to that. It's got to be comfortable. It could be agile, adjusting strategy or tactics to respond to what's really happening. And you've got to be willing to share failures as well as successes. We all learn more from failures than successes. Share that learning is what I really want to see from corporates in terms of accountability, reporting honestly, transparently. It builds authenticity, it builds trust if you do that. Both of those things can inspire the necessary improvements and changes we need to see. And the last one I want to speak to is awareness. and this is an important one, I think, that often gets overlooked. About 4.5 years ago, I went to a showing of a lovely film called The Ponds, which, at least in the UK, is now available on Netflix. And it's about the year-round swimmers on Hampstead Heath in North London, near where I live. It's a beautiful film, and it tells the story of how people have survived life-threatening accidents and breast cancer and, you know, death of life partners through regular swimming in the ponds throughout the year. I was kind of inspired by seeing the film in 2019, and I tried to go on my birthday, which is an idea that someone had in the film, which is in March. And it was 9 degrees. It was freezing. I was in for a very short time. My brother was there to sort of spot me, bring me some birthday cake, bless him. But I thought it was nuts. Now, since then, listen, I'm lucky enough to have a job where I think I'm taking action on the biggest issues humanity faces each day, and I find hope in taking action. But, you know, it's been tough sometimes to kind of keep going or to be positive all the time. And I now find that swimming and that regular actual immersion in nature has helped me. So last summer I started swimming again, and I swam through the winter for the first time. I swam twice when it was 3.1 degrees in the water, and I can tell you I've never felt so joyful and resilient as I do because of that practice. Now, I'm not saying that's what you need to do. You don't need to go into cold water swimming if that's not your thing. My point is, leaders and change makers, we have to be aware of our own limitations, of our own assumptions, of our own values, of our own principles, of our own strengths and weaknesses. We have to look to develop ourselves. We have to demonstrate character. We have to model, you know, honesty, integrity, and so on. But most of all, we need to look after ourselves. We need to take responsibility for our own performance and our health. In a way, we need to model what being resilient looks like to the younger generation, who reasonably enough are pretty pissed off and are suffering significant mental illness at scale because of the mess that older generations have made, in part because of that mess that older generations have made of the planet. So I want you just to take on board this final reflection about awareness. Take regular breaks from your work. You know, perhaps form a personal advisory board of trusted friends. Do whatever the work that you need to do to understand what depletes you, understand what restores you, and to practice that restorative habit regularly. So, to what degree are we genuinely being accountable to future generations? Are we measuring the right things in the right way to show how aligned we are with what the world needs? And how do I tend to react when the going gets tough? What has replenished me? How can I build that into a habit I do regularly? So, my 3 couplets: approach and ambition. Lead with humility and set an ambition that is aligned with what the world needs. Activism and alliances. Know what you stand for and stand together with others, using your voice as well as your products and services to bring about that change. And accountability and awareness. Be thoughtful about how you assess and report on your organizational health, and build the habits to ensure your own personal well-being. Thank you very much. I'm happy to get into a conversation with you all. Thank you.
Maybe just a question from me, if I may, just to kind of kick things off. I think from a corporate perspective, there's no doubt that things are shifting from a positive perspective. But I think, you know, intention to do things is a lot different to actually implementing stuff. Do we not have a situation of a bit of apathy creeping in? Certainly at a corporate level, where senior leaders say they're going to do stuff, but then there's always a reason not to do something. Maybe they haven't completed their planning, or maybe they haven't quite decided how it fits into their strategy. And they're kind of using those issues as maybe a reason to not actually start doing some stuff.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I'm sure all of us who are encouraging businesses to go on this journey or to really do what's needed will have come across that kind of challenge for sure. I think what I like to say is that things are changing pretty quickly and there is alignment here. So your business success in a relatively short period of time, 1 or 2 strategic planning cycles, relies on you grappling with this agenda in a wholehearted way. And if you don't, you're not going to be surviving the changes that are coming down the track. So while I understand, got to put one foot in front of the other, I understand we've got to keep the lights on. If you're not thinking about these issues with a little bit more of a long-term horizon, you're not going to be around.
Yeah, and maybe a few companies need to kind of go to the wall for the kind of the whole to actually appreciate that they've got to do something. Otherwise, it could be them as well.
Yeah, I think so. Sarah, I can see you have your hand raised. It's a good Zoom use there. Go for it. You have a question, I guess.
Yeah, well, I suppose, my business has been a B Corp since it was quite young. It's still quite young. We're 6.5 years old, but since we were, within the first few years. So I spent a lot of time talking to other B Corps and, in the kind of purpose-led business space. But the vast majority of the business space is really not like that. And even like the attitudes around, well, I'm in Scotland and there's a big push towards 4-day week going on, which has a really good evidence base. Even stuff around, being a values-led business is seen as a sort of nice to have. And I know like there's lots of things that are much better if you're a values-based business, like it's easier to recruit. Like there are some massive business benefits, but I don't feel like we've won the argument on them. I still think there's a really dominant culture, which is, oh no, you can't trust your employees and you got to squeeze every last penny out of them. And the only thing that really matters is shareholders. And so I suppose, how do we, who are all talking to each other in this lovely business for good space, influence those businesses? Because I kind of feel like we can do this and we can build a movement and we can bring people along with us, but mainly who we're bringing along are quite small fry, and it's harder to bring the big fry. And actually, I was very disappointed with the whole Coots Bank thing because, they are a B Corp and then they got into all that trouble. And so anyway, have you got any suggestions about how we make this movement bigger and more powerful?
I mean, I hear you, Sarah. No question. I've been in similar conversations where businesses haven't wanted to go there. And in terms of how we make it more powerful, I mean, I do think there is a role in calling for regulatory changes. I do think we need to sort of raise the floor for everyone. I do think B Corps, I know Jane Fiona and others you want to call B Corps. I do think we're exemplars. I do think we're sort of showing what good business practice can look like. So I suppose I do think it's in that sort of activism and alliances spaces in a way. I think it's in saying, look, you don't really have a choice. You have to stand for something and you have to call for change that's needed. And as I said, the risk of repeating myself, I don't think the world of business is going to look much like it does today by 2030. I mean, I just don't think it can. Right? We're seeing, I think if we were to project ahead to 2030, I think, and look back at some of the supply chain challenges we've seen, some of the polarization society we've seen, we would see those as early indicators of societal fracture. And that the response to that was, I would agree with you, would be, very patchy at best in 2023. I don't expect in 2030 that this sort of patchy response that we're seeing today is going to be sustainable. And I'd like to think that, think of a life of a CEO, that I think we can appeal to sort of stewardship mindset. Right? We could say, look, you want to hand this business on, in better shape than it is today. You want to stamp your mark on that, maybe appeal to a little bit of ego there. you have to be responding to these macro trends in order to set the business up for future success. You don't want to be, the CEO took the ship down because they didn't listen to what was coming. And I think that can be quite a compelling conversation to have with leaders.
Yeah. I wanted you to comment, maybe because you are in that part of the world. I mean, like I am in America, so here sometimes these topics about sustainability goes like slower than over there. Yesterday I was checking that Switzerland, especially in Zurich and in France, they pass a law about the companies, and in general the society has to like move to circular economy. How do you think that this could impact in the rest of Europe, and especially in the area that you are working right now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a good point. That sort of enhanced producer responsibility legislation that we're seeing in some countries is going to become more widespread across Europe, and I think it is an interesting move because it challenges a fundamental aspect of our current system, which is essentially extractive, right? It says we can take what we need, make something with it, like add to financial capital with some, natural capital and some human capital, and we can extract more financial capital from that combination. And it doesn't matter if we diminish those natural capitals, or if we ignore that social capital, or if you like, abuse that human capital in so doing. And I think what the circular economy principles start to make you think is actually that sort of take, make, dispose linear model, where, as I say, the only capital that you enhance is financial, that's just dumb, and it's not how systems work. There's it's a very human approach to an error in thinking, frankly, to think that there's a sort of linear model here. When a tree falls in a forest, it kind of grandfathers future trees, right? Like those are the sort of natural cycles that we see all around us. And I don't know why we think our economy, which we imagined in the shape it is today, should operate any differently. So I do genuinely think there's something interesting, Rocio, in what you say about that sort of circular economy mindset, perhaps breaking open some of the deeper thinking about system value, to refer to that slide I showed, more widely, more broadly. And certainly that legislation, you're right, is kind of emerging out of European countries and the EU, and is going to spread from there around the world.
I hope you're right, and spread around the world, including China.
Yeah, everywhere, for sure.
Adam, as companies change, and maybe if a company is not changing quickly enough and they face all sorts of issues, I'm guessing the instances of potential greenwashing may kind of rear their ugly head even more to try and save those organisations from going to the wall maybe sooner than they should have done. How do you think companies can avoid greenwashing?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I would say, there's some sort of tactics and processes that those of us who work in sustainability use quite regularly. The jargon is materiality assessment, which is essentially, a thoughtful, stakeholder-informed assessment of where your most material, your most significant impacts on people and planet are, and as well as the risks to your business. So sort of inbound and outbound, double materiality, so-called. I think if you genuinely do a good process of exploring what those most significant impacts are, you should be prioritizing action in the ones that make the most difference to people and planet. And if you do that, and you do that kind of openly and honestly, without rushing to the external communication side, ahead of genuinely implementing the policies and practices internally, then I think you're safeguarding yourself against that risk. So I would say work on material issues, embed good practice and thinking into your business, and then start communicating about it. If you go through those 3 steps rather than rushing to step 3, I think you can avoid greenwash.
Yeah. Very good.
I'd be delighted to take any other questions or to get into a conversation, or if you'd like to consider the reflections. Here we go. It says bake a fish, yeah? The hand up.
Hello, it's Emma here.
Hi.
Hiya. It's not even bake a fish anymore, but that's too long a story and I need to update the thing. I suppose my reflection on all of this really, Adam, is that after Good to Great, a lot of those companies then fell away. And there was another epic book called The Halo Effect, which talked about how sometimes we attribute things as causal when they're not causal. And I was listening in about the greenwashing and kind of like that stuff. And I'm thinking, what I'm really thinking is actually in reaction to the earlier question about small companies and can we make much difference? And it's the big companies that have the biggest impact. I'm not sure how much longer the bigger companies are necessarily going to be around. And I really liked your last response, which was around, well, kind of start doing it first and then communicate it. And I do feel like actually the place to keep working is with the early adopters and the people that get it anyway, and to put our energy into the B Corps and stuff like that. And then the rest will follow, because I think otherwise it's just a bit tiring, you know, trying to take on an Amazon or something. So that was it. I didn't have any like a question really. It's just reflections of how those pieces seem to come together in my neurodivergent mind.
Thank you. I'm glad you're neurodivergent. It's an interesting observation. I would basically agree, Emma, with what you say. I could definitely, like, I'm not that interested in having a conversation with someone who is entirely resistant to this agenda. I don't have to. I've got limited capacity.
Yeah.
And I can speak to other people. Now, so totally with you on that. Interestingly, you know, the B Corp movement is deliberately and increasingly seeking to include larger companies, as I'm sure you've noticed. And sometimes that goes wrong or looks a little bit dodgy. But generally, I think it's the right move. Clearly, the standards are behind where they need to be, and they came in 2019. They were probably designed in 2018. As I already indicated, a lot has changed in those 5 years. And to be fair to the B Corp movement, everyone's kind of aware of that, and the new standards are coming in, which are much more about meeting minimum standards across a basket of issues and not sort of hand picking, which is all correct and just 2 or 3 years too late. But nonetheless, all good practice. Large companies are definitely getting on board with this agenda as well. I mean, not, with more complexity, more challenges. So I work with Jane Fiona, who's on this call, helping Bailey's, which is a subsidiary of Diageo, become a certified B Corporation, for example. And we're helping a $20 billion steel business in the States go through the process at the moment. There are some increasingly large companies that get that this is not just a compelling competitive advantage for them, but actually is, sort of fundamental to future success. And like I said earlier, I genuinely think that the landscape's going to look so different by the turn of the decade that we will look back on this kind of like, I'll give you an example. Clash.
I'll give you an example of our own experience around that, which is that my colleague is she's just disappeared actually, but she's a trans woman, and we went to an event in Highways, and she was super nervous about going into that event and being openly who she now is. And so we went in arm in arm because she was actually shaking about it. And there were a few idiots who thought they were in invisibility cloaks who just stood and stared at her. But, I just stared back at them. But most people were like, oh, hiya, and really welcoming. And, whole industries can shift. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of the smaller companies to demonstrate how that shift can happen. And I think also, going back to the earlier question, I think we could also be more demanding as suppliers of the bigger companies. Like I did work years ago with Waitrose, and I watched them absolutely screw over some of their suppliers, and they attempted to screw us over and said, you know, we take however many days to pay. And I said, well, not for us, you don't. You pay within 7 days, or we don't work for you. And I think there's something about smaller companies and these peer-to-peer relationships, which one of the reasons I'm so excited about this movement, is it's these peer-to-peer relationships across and between industries, where we all say, actually, we're setting our standards for what we'll accept from our customers as well. So it goes in both. You don't just have the supply chain, you've also got a customer chain, and these are the standards we're expecting from our customers. And certain clients we won't work for. And one of the things I was wondering even is there yet like another way round award that smaller organizations give to bigger organizations? And if there was, what would that look like?
That's a nice kind of way to sort of, you know, subvert
Just
the sort of
turn it on the head.
thinking.
Yeah,
that's I certainly would agree with you about things like payment terms and services. I kind of think a very winnable, easy to sell to any political stripe in the country would be a kind of code of conduct, or even frankly legislation beyond that says, you know, if you have a micro business as a supplier, you pay within 15 days or something, you know, some
it just is.
small. I don't see any justification, because frankly, by dint of their size, they're not going to
notice.
They're not going to notice. You're not
Exactly.
going to be even 1%, you know, of the annual spend with suppliers.
So anyway, that was a thought. I think we could do a Good Company Awards where it's some of the smaller companies going upwards towards our customers, and that could be quite cool.
Yeah, indeed. Sign me up.
Perhaps it's something we could do with the meetup, Emma, if you know any of the organisers.
I don't think I've come across any of them, Scott, but if you do, yeah.
Yeah.
Look at me doing sarcasm. So proud.
I know, it's good.
Yeah.
And adulting. Okay, I've got one observation, Adam, and it kind of it popped into my head. Yeah. And where it came from was there was a conversation I had. So one of the large service organisations had taken over running Edinburgh City Council. And they wanted to look at the arrears function of the council. And someone came across from Glasgow who had used Vanguard and their consultancy, and they looked at the first line, second line support and how people were getting help and supported, and they really turned it around. They completely turned it around, so much so that there were no arrears. Yeah, and citizens were getting lots of help. And when they went and explained it to like the program manager or director at the large organization, I won't mention who they are, he said that can't have happened. And the guy standing there going like, okay, I can put you in a car 35 miles and you can see it. And I do wonder sometimes, with the problem with business is we've got these biases, we've got these kind of myths, and we've got these things that are all out of date. And even if we've got physical evidence of change, it's not filtering in through. Have you got any thoughts about that?
Well, it's certainly true that there. I mean, I sort of hinted at this with my reference to Project Drawdown. You know, there are plenty of good solutions out there that are being ignored, right? And so I mean, I broadly agree with the challenge you're posing. Like, there's lots of pockets of good practice, and to Emma's point, like, you know, I'm very proud to be running a B Corp. I think we intentionally think about how we treat staff, how we engage, how we show up around climate issues or diversity issues and so on, and it's intentional, right? I mean, you know, it's you know, we deliberately think about it, and so I'm all for, like, you know, pockets of success. I suppose I do think it takes kind of national bodies, national movements, regulatory change ultimately to raise the floor. Like, I think there's lots of great pockets of expertise. If you look at, for example, I mean, there's a publicly available standard now from the BSI on purpose. What does it look like to be a purpose business? Full of great ideas, not very well taken up yet, but a brilliant document, very thoughtful. There's Colin Mayer's work at the British Academy that I already referred to around the purpose of business. Again, full of great examples and insights about what it means to run a business in that way. There is a lot of practice. I do think it needs some inspirational, perhaps leaders or some large companies to sign up to something. You know what I mean? I think if people see their peers explicitly voicing the call for change, I do think that can motivate people. Like that was essentially the core strategy at the heart of the work I did with the Principles for Responsible Banking Review and FFI. I just said, first of all, I was meeting with all of the sort of heads of CSR and sustainability in all these banks. And I said, I need your comms people on the next call. And then the comms, some of the, 2/3 of them put their comms person. And I said, when the comms people were on the call, I said, I need your CEO to make a video about why you're in this, one of the founding banks of the Principles for Responsible Banking initiative. And I need them to speak to 5 other CEOs that they know at other banks. And Unify said, oh, no, none of those CEOs will ever make a video. That's not going to happen. And they're not going to send it to anyone they know. And it's just, yeah, good idea, but nah. 25 of the 28 founding banks, I think, CEOs made videos.
Well done.
It was a member get member strategy. It was nothing more, frankly, insightful than that, right? It was peer-to-peer advocacy. And I think that's what we need more of. I think people go, well, he did it. Oh, I don't know, she did it. I think that I love what she's talking about. I love how the success she's had. I want to do what she did. We're pretty straightforward at core people. We like to see proof points and we like to follow good examples. And I think it's not probably, in the pages of that publicly available standard of BSI, it's probably to sort of hedge my earlier answer. It's probably in good stories, as Emma has just said. It's probably in that peer-to-peer advocacy, right? Like, that's social proof.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Right, Mike. I think we're coming to time.
Good.
Do you want to,
Yeah. So
there's a hand up. There's a hand up. Quick hand up.
Yeah.
Niall, hi. Do you want to come off mute, ask your question or make your point?
Indeed. Thank you very much. A very succinct presentation and tons to think about. I've nowhere got my head around it yet, but thank you very much. Plenty to think about. What's coming to my head is that organizations don't naturally collaborate because they compete, especially in the same sector. So I think rather than the negative messages is what everyone's been bombarded with, but what's coming out today is more of the positive side of it, which I think is hugely powerful. As human beings, we collaborate naturally. So question, I don't necessarily want an answer, it's a thought, but I'm going to phrase it as a question. How do we get organizations to collaborate? Because this isn't something that we should be competing about, because it's for the benefit of everyone. That's one thought. And I can't quite relate that back to tribes, which is what we kind of are, I guess.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, I'm, you have to manage it a little bit around, sort of avoiding kind of monopolies and mergers, kind of commission, investigating and stuff. But I do think there's some real opportunity for sectoral bodies. Like, I mean, that was why I was really pleased to work and sort of inspire the creation of the Sustainable Beauty Coalition, because, they all deal with plastic waste, right? They all deal with some chemicals in their products that, most of which they can substitute for, but not all of them. What's the solution to that? It would benefit all of them to explore that together. And they're getting there on that, right? None of them want to be hauled over the coals for greenwash. So they've created a kind of guide to make sure that the whole beauty industry in the UK, manages that risk. Like all of those things, all those kinds of initiatives make sense to be done at a collective, at a sectoral level. And I think at a sort of bio-regional level or at an industry sectoral level is that sort of meso level, if you like not the micro level of an individual business, not the sort of macro level of the whole economy, but at that sort of meso level, I think there's some really interesting opportunities to collaborate and kind of, you know, rising tide, lifting all boats.
But I guess a little bit of this is that's really difficult. Certainly haven't got an answer for this, but it's. I mean, we're focusing on organisations, understandably, and they've got a huge part to play. But it's the joint force of government and organisations and individuals. It's the sort of three-stranded dimension.
Totally, no question. Yeah, and I was trying to hint a little bit at that in my talk, but you're absolutely right. Now there's plenty more to kind of unpack around that sort of integration.
I know that wasn't today's subject, but that's because I'm quite new to this. So,
okay. No, but yeah, I agree. Mike, you probably need to close it out.
Yeah, exactly. So Adam, just one final question. We're trying to kind of add a bit of continuity between all our speakers. So can I ask you, what question would you ask our next speaker?
Oh, good. Please, sorry, remind me what the
It could be any question.
What would I ask the next speaker? What an interesting provocation. I would say, how are you putting a dent in the universe? Yeah.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll let you know what the answer is if you're not on the call.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, Adam, really many thanks from all of us here for being our first speaker.
You're welcome.
Thanks to Scott for keeping us on track and monitoring the chat board. And also thanks to everyone for joining. Hopefully you found the last 60 minutes or so useful and informative. A plug for the next one. So our next meetup is going to be on Tuesday, the 29th of August at 1800, so 6 p.m. London time. And Scott's going to be joined by Tim Robinson, and they're going to be talking about all things AI and agility and the art of sustainability. So we look forward to seeing you again on that call, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye.